My son-in-law called CPS to frame me as a danger, but he forgot I spent 6 months recording his every move. When the officer arrived to investigate, I showed him the evidence that sent my son-in-law to prison instead. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The heavy brass knocker hit the wood like a gavel, and I knew before I even reached the door that my life was about to be dismantled. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of morning where the sun looks too bright for the news it brings. I pulled the handle back, and there they were, a woman in a charcoal blazer holding a clipboard, and a police officer whose belt jingled with the weight of silver handcuffs, and a radio that hissed with static. "Dorothy Castelline," the woman said, and her voice was as cold as the badge pinned to her lapel. "I am Jennifer Martinez from Child Protective Services, and we have received a report that you are a danger to your grandchildren." My heart didn't just skip. It felt like it hit a wall. I looked past them to the street, half expecting to see my son-in-law, Derek, watching from his car with that smug, tight-jawed grin he wore whenever he thought he was winning. He had finally done it. He had taken the private war we had been fighting for 6 months and brought the state to my doorstep to finish me off. I gripped the doorframe so hard the wood bit into my palm, but I didn't crumble. I couldn't. Olivia and Noah were everything to me, and if I went down now, they would be left alone in a house where love had been replaced by a ledger of control. "Please, come in," I said, stepping aside. My voice was steadier than my hands. Jennifer Martinez walked into my living room, her eyes scanning the family photos on the mantel like she was looking for cracks in the glass. The officer, a man named Daniels, stood by the door, his shadow stretching across my rug. "Miss Castellan, we received a formal complaint from Derek Morrison," she began, clicking her pen. "He claims you have exhibited unstable mental behavior, made threats against the family, and that you are attempting to alienate the children from their parents. He provided statements from your daughter, Emma, corroborating these concerns." The mention of Emma hurt worse than the accusation itself. My own daughter, the girl I had raised to be strong and independent, was now a ghost inside her own home, signing her name to Derek's lies just to keep the peace. "None of that is true," I told her, sitting on the edge of my floral armchair. "I follow their rules exactly. I babysat 3 times a week for years. I am the one who picks them up from school. I am the one who knows Olivia's favorite bedtime story and the only way Noah will eat his crusts." Martinez didn't look up from her notes. "Mr. Morrison says you have been harassing them for 2 weeks, showing up unannounced and refusing to leave. He says the children are terrified of you. He is requesting a restraining order, and we are here to determine if an emergency removal of your visitation rights is necessary." She finally looked at me, and there was a flicker of professional pity in her eyes. "Do you have anything to say to these specific claims of instability?" I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. For months, I had watched Derek's jaw tighten every time the kids ran to me instead of him. I had heard the way he cut Emma off mid-sentence, the way he turned every Sunday dinner into a trial. I'd seen the signs of a man who didn't want a family. He wanted a kingdom. And because I saw it, I had prepared for this exact Tuesday. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. "I don't just have something to say, Miss Martinez. I have something you need to hear. For the past 6 months, I have recorded every single interaction I have had with Derek and Emma." The room went silent. Officer Daniels shifted his weight, his boots creaking on the hardwood. "You recorded them?" Martinez asked, her pen hovering over the page. "Every conversation, every threat, and every lie," I said, standing up. I walked to my bedroom, my pulse thrumming in my ears, and retrieved the small black external hard drive from my desk. I had 50 hours of audio on that drive. 50 hours of the truth that Derek thought he could bury under a CPS report. I came back and plugged it into my laptop, the screen glowing white in the dim room. "Where would you like to start?" I asked, my finger hovering over the first file. Martinez looked at the officer, then back at me. "Let's start with the most recent," she said. I clicked on a file labeled March 15th, the day Derek told me I was banned from the house. The speakers crackled, and then Derek's voice filled my living room, sounding like ice breaking underfoot. "Dorothy, Emma, and I have decided you are taking a break from the kids," he said. My own voice followed, shaky and desperate, asking what I had done wrong. "It is not what you have done," Derek snapped. "It is that you are overbearing. You are creating anxiety. This is just how it is. Goodbye." Martinez leaned in, her eyes narrowing as the recording played my sobbing response, and Derek's cold, emotionless click of the hang-up. "That doesn't sound like a woman making threats," she whispered, almost to herself. I looked at her and felt the first spark of hope. "That is because I wasn't the one making them," I said. "But wait until you hear what he said when he thought no one was listening." I scrolled down to a file from 2 months ago, a night when I was folding laundry in Emma's kitchen while the kids played in the next room. The recording started with the sound of plastic blocks hitting the floor and the muffled laughter of my grandchildren. Then, the heavy thud of the back door slamming. Derek was home early. You could hear the atmosphere shift even through the tiny microphone in my pocket. "Dorothy," he said, his voice a sharp blade. "Why are you still here?" I told him Emma asked me to stay for dinner because the kids missed me. The sound of him walking into the kitchen was heavy, deliberate. "We talked about this, Emma," he shouted. "I am not comfortable with her hovering. It is suffocating." Emma's voice was a whisper, a thin thread of what it used to be. "Derek, she's just helping." "It's fine." "It is not fine," he roared. "I want her to leave. Now." In the background, Olivia started to cry, a small, high-pitched sound that made my heart ache all over again. I heard myself in the recording, apologizing, gathering my things, trying to keep my voice steady for the children. But as I walked to the door, Derek followed me. The audio got clearer as he leaned in close to my ear. "You think you're so important, Dorothy?" he hissed. "You're nothing. You're a guest in this life, and guests can be evicted. Just watch how fast I can make them forget you exist." Jennifer Martinez stopped the recording. Her face was no longer a mask of professional neutrality. It was tight with something that looked a lot like anger. "Mr. Morrison claimed in his report that you were the one who became aggressive during that encounter," she said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "He stated that you refused to leave and that he had to physically shield the children from your outburst." I pointed to the laptop screen. "Does that sound like an outburst to you? Or does it sound like a man trying to provoke one?" Officer Daniels stepped closer to the table. "Miss Castellan, recording people without their knowledge can be a gray area," he said, though his tone wasn't accusatory anymore. I stayed calm, just like my lawyer, Patricia Hale, had told me 2 months ago. "I live in a one-party consent state, officer," I replied. "I checked the law before I bought the first device. I am legally allowed to record any conversation I am a part of. I wasn't doing it to be sneaky. I was doing it because I knew Derek was building a case to erase me, and I refused to let him lie my grandchildren out of my life." I played another file. This one was from 5 months ago, a phone call I had recorded while sitting in my car. It was Derek talking to a friend, his voice loud and boastful because he didn't realize Emma had left her phone connected to the car's Bluetooth while I was using it to drive the kids to soccer. "Yeah, her mom is still hanging around," he laughed. "Emma won't put her foot down, so I'm going to have to do it myself. I'm thinking a CPS report." maybe a restraining order. Once the authorities get involved, Emma won't have a choice. She'll have to side with me. It'll be official. The crazy old lady won't be able to get within 500 feet of my house." Martinez dropped her pen. "He planned this," she said, the words hanging in the air like a sentence. "He didn't call us because he was worried about the kids. He called us because we were part of his strategy." I nodded, tears finally stinging my eyes. "He's been planning it for months. He's been isolating Emma, making her feel like she's a bad mother if she listens to me. He told her that if I stayed involved, the kids would grow up confused and unstable. He turned my love for them into a weapon against her. I showed them the spreadsheet I had made. Every file was time-stamped. Every conversation was summarized. I had documented the 6 months of my life that Derek had tried to turn into a horror story. I showed them the texts from Emma, 17 of them in a single hour, begging me to drop the court case I had eventually filed for visitation. She was terrified. She said Derek was furious, that he said I was ruining the family. I played the voicemail where she sobbed that she didn't know how to stop him, that it was just easier to go along with what he wanted because he got so angry when she disagreed. "That is not a family dynamic, Miss Martinez," I said, my voice cracking. "That is a hostage situation, and those 2 children are right in the middle of it." Martinez stood up and closed her file. She looked at Officer Daniels and gave a sharp nod. "Miss Castellan, I have seen a lot of things in this job, but rarely do I see someone so prepared for the worst. This investigation into you is closed. You are not a danger. In fact, based on what I've just heard, you might be the only person telling the truth in this entire mess." I felt a massive weight lift off my chest, a pressure I hadn't even realized was crushing me until it was gone. "Does that mean I can see them?" I asked. Martinez softened. "We can't dictate custody. That's for a judge. But our report will state that the allegations were unfounded and malicious. And Officer Daniels will be forwarding these recordings to the district attorney. Filing a false report is a crime, and Mr. Morrison is about to find out that the system he tried to weaponize has a very long memory." I thanked them, my hands shaking as I saw them to the door. I watched their car pull away, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I breathed. I went back to the laptop and looked at the files. I had won the first battle, but I knew Derek. He was like a cornered animal, and when people like him lose control, they don't just walk away. They burn everything down on their way out. I picked up the phone to call my lawyer, but before I could dial, it rang in my hand. It was Emma. "Mom!" she screamed, and the sound was pure terror. "Derek found the recorder you left in the kitchen. He's gone crazy. He's packing the kids' bags. He says we're leaving and you'll never find us." The line went dead before I could say a word. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed my keys and my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I drove to their house, my vision tunneling on the road ahead. I had spent 68 years being the polite, quiet grandmother, the one who followed the rules and kept the peace. But as I pulled onto their street and saw Derek throwing a suitcase into the trunk of his black SUV, that woman died. I screeched to a halt behind his car, blocking him in. I jumped out before the engine had even stopped. "Derek!" I yelled. "Get the kids out of that car!" He turned around, and the look on his face wasn't the smug grin I was used to. It was raw, ugly rage. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hair was a mess. "Get out of here, Dorothy," he spat. "You've ruined everything. You think those recordings mean anything? I'll tell them you planted them. I'll tell them you're a stalker." Emma was standing in the driveway, holding Noah, who was crying into her shoulder. Olivia was already in the back seat, her face pressed against the glass, wide-eyed and terrified. "Emma, get in my car," I shouted. He can't take them. Derek stepped toward me, his chest puffed out, trying to use his height to intimidate me like he always did. You have no rights here, old woman, he screamed. The CPS lady was just here. I told her everything. I looked him right in the eye, not moving an inch. I know she was there, Derek. She was at my house an hour ago. She heard the recordings. She knows you lied. He froze. The anger on his face flickered into something else. Fear. It was only for a second, but I saw it. You're lying, he whispered. No, I'm not, I said, stepping closer. The police are on their way back right now. They know about the false report. They know about the threats. If you drive away with those kids right now, it won't just be a family dispute. It'll be kidnapping. Is that the story you want to tell the judge? Derek looked at the car, then back at me. His hands were shaking. He was a man who lived on control, and for the first time in his life, he had none. He turned toward Emma, his voice dropping into that low, manipulative tone he used to keep her small. Emma, tell her. Tell her we're fine. Tell her she's the one causing the problems. Emma looked at him, then at me, then down at the little boy shivering in her arms. She looked like she was waking up from a long, dark dream. No, Derek, she said, her voice thin but clear. We're not fine. I'm not going with you. She started walking toward my car. Derek lunged for her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. You're not going anywhere, he yelled. I grabbed my phone and held it up like a shield. I'm recording right now, Derek. The camera is on. Every word you say and every move you make, it's going straight to the cloud. Do you want to go to jail today? He let go of her like she was red-hot iron. He backed away, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. Fine, he screamed. Take them. Take the house. Take everything. But don't think this is over. I'll make sure you regret the day you ever crossed me. He jumped into his SUV, slammed it into gear, and swerved onto the lawn to get around my car, the tires kicking up dirt and grass. We watched him roar down the street, his engine screaming until he disappeared around the corner. Emma collapsed onto the driveway, Noah still clutched in her arms. I ran to her, pulling them both into a hug. It's okay, I whispered, though I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. He's gone. You're safe. Olivia climbed out of the back seat and threw herself into the huddle, her small arms wrapping around my neck. Grandma, is Daddy coming back? She asked, her voice trembling. Not today, sweetheart, I told her. Not for a long time. We went inside the house, a place that had felt like a prison for so long. Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty spot where the recorder had been. He found it when he was looking for his keys, she said quietly. He just snapped, Mom. He started screaming that you were a spy, that I was a traitor. I've never seen him like that. I sat across from her and took her hands. Her knuckles were white. Emma, you can't stay here. He has a key. He knows your routine. We need to go to my house, and we need to call Patricia. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone. Patricia Hale didn't waste a second. By 5 p.m., she had filed for an emergency temporary restraining order and a petition for full custody. She told us to stay put and lock the doors. The recordings were our greatest weapon, but Derek's instability was a real threat. We spent the night in my living room, the kids asleep on the pull-out couch while Emma and I sat by the window, watching the shadows of the trees dance on the driveway. Every time a car drove by, Emma flinched. He's going to fight us, isn't he? She asked. He's going to use every dollar he has to make this a nightmare. I looked at the little digital recorder sitting on the coffee table. Let him, I said. We have the truth, Emma. And for the first time in 8 years, we have each other. We fell into a restless sleep, just as the sun began to peek over the horizon. But at 7 a.m., A loud thud on the porch woke us up. I ran to the door, my heart in my throat. It wasn't Derek. It was a man in a cheap suit holding a thick stack of papers. "Emma Morrison?" he asked. "You've been served." Emma took the papers with trembling hands. I stood over her shoulder as she flipped through the pages. It wasn't just a divorce filing. Derek had gone for the throat. He was suing for full custody of the kids, claiming that Emma was suffering from a mental breakdown induced by my malicious influence. He had attached a letter from a private psychologist I'd never heard of, suggesting that Emma was unfit to parent because she was unable to set boundaries with a toxic and controlling maternal figure. "He's trying to turn it around," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "He's calling us the abusers." I felt a surge of cold fury. This was his move. If he couldn't control us with silence, he would control us with the law. He had money, $250,000 in a high-interest savings account that he'd always kept in his name only, telling Emma it was for their retirement. Now he was using that money to hire the most ruthless family lawyer in the state, a man named Richard Steele, known for destroying grandmothers in court. I called Patricia. She didn't sound surprised. "This is the scorched earth strategy, Dorothy," she told me. "He knows the recordings are coming, so he's trying to invalidate the source. He's going to paint you as a master manipulator who coached Emma and the kids. We need to move fast. I want you to go to the bank, right now. Emma needs to secure whatever joint assets are left before he drains them." We drove to the bank in a daze. Emma had a secondary account, a small one with $5,000 that her grandmother had left her. When we sat down with the teller, Emma's voice was barely a squeak. "I'd like to check the balance on the joint household account, please." The teller typed for a moment, then looked up with a frown. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but that account was closed yesterday afternoon. The balance of $42,000 was transferred to an external institution." Emma slumped in the chair. "He took it," she said. "He took everything. We had bills due, the mortgage, the kids' preschool tuition. He left us with nothing." I put my arm around her. "Not nothing," I said. "He forgot about the one thing he couldn't touch." I reached into my purse and pulled out my own bank book. I had lived a simple life. My husband's pension and my own savings had grown quietly over the years. I had $85,000 sitting there, money I'd planned to leave to the kids for college. "We're using this," I told her. "I don't care about the college fund. I care about your freedom." We went straight from the bank to Patricia's office. The atmosphere was electric. Patricia had already received a call from Richard Steele. "He offered a settlement," she said, her lip curling. "He says if you drop the restraining order and agree to 50-50 custody with no child support, he'll stop the mental fitness investigation. He's trying to blackmail you into silence." Emma looked at me, and I saw the old fear creeping back into her eyes. "Maybe we should just—" "No," I said, cutting her off. "Emma, look at me. If you give him 50-50 now, you're giving him a lifetime of opportunities to hurt you. He will use those kids to punish you every single weekend. He will tell them you're crazy. He will make your life a living hell. We are not settling. We are going to trial." The next 3 weeks were a blur of affidavits and interviews. The psychological evaluations Derek had requested backfired almost immediately. The court-appointed psychologist spent 4 hours with Emma and 2 hours with me. Then they spent 2 hours with Derek. In the final report, the doctor noted that Derek exhibited high conflict personality traits and a lack of empathy for the maternal-child bond. But Richard Steele was good. He found a neighbor, a man Derek used to drink beer with, who was willing to testify that he'd seen me screaming at Derek in the driveway. It didn't matter that I was yelling to protect the kids. Steele was going to frame it as elder instability. The day of the temporary custody hearing arrived. The courtroom was small, beige, and felt like a pressure cooker. Derek sat across the aisle, wearing an expensive navy suit and a look of practiced sorrow. He wouldn't look at us. Richard Steele stood up and began his opening statement, and it was a masterpiece of character assassination. "Your Honor," he said, pacing the floor, "this is a tragic case of a grandmother who cannot let go of her daughter's adulthood. Dorothy Castellan has systematically dismantled this marriage. She has used illegal recordings to spy on a private home. She has poisoned these children against their father, a man who has worked 60 hours a week to provide for them." He pointed a finger at me. "She is a vigilante, Your Honor. She is unstable, obsessed, and dangerous to the sanctity of the family unit. We ask that all visitation be suspended and that Mrs. Morrison be ordered into mandatory psychiatric care." Emma was shaking so hard the wooden bench was rattling. I reached over and gripped her hand. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face like stone. It was our turn. Patricia Hale stood up. She didn't have a long speech. She didn't have a navy suit. She just had a laptop. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Steele wants to talk about the sanctity of the home. I'd like to show you what that sanctity actually looked like." She hit play on the recording from the night Derek threatened to make the kids forget I existed. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair, leaned forward as Derek's hissed threats echoed through the room. Then, Patricia played the audio of Derek laughing with his friend about filing a false CPS report. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's lawyer tried to object, claiming the audio was edited and unreliable, but the judge held up a hand. "I am more interested in the defendant's reaction to these recordings," the judge said, looking directly at Derek. "Mr. Morrison, you look quite different on tape than you do in that suit." Derek's face was turning a deep, ugly purple. He leaned over and whispered something to Steele, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. But then, the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A man in a uniform walked in and handed a note to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. She read it, her eyebrows rising. "Well," she said, looking back at the room, "it seems the district attorney has finished their review of the CPS report. Mr. Morrison, I suggest you listen carefully." The judge cleared her throat, the paper fluttering in her hand. "Mr. Morrison, the district attorney has officially issued a warrant for your arrest on charges of filing a false police report and perjury. It seems your statements to the CPS officer were not only contradicted by the recordings, but were proven to be a deliberate attempt to mislead a state investigation." The courtroom exploded. Richard Steele was on his feet, shouting about due process, but Derek didn't say a word. He just stood up and bolted for the side door. 2 bailiffs tackled him before he even reached the handle. They slammed him against the wall, the sound of his head hitting the wood echoing like a gunshot. I watched as the silver handcuffs, the same ones I'd seen on the officer's belt at my front door, clicked shut around his wrists. Emma started to cry, but they weren't the quiet, defeated tears I was used to. They were loud, gasping sobs of pure relief. She leaned into me, and for the first time in years, she felt solid. The judge banged her gavel until the room fell silent. "In light of these developments," the judge said, her voice like iron, "I am granting Emma Morrison temporary full legal and physical custody. Mr. Morrison's visitation is suspended indefinitely, pending the outcome of his criminal trial. Dorothy Castellan, your restraining order is granted, and Mr. Steele, I suggest you advise your client that any further attempts to contact this family will result in immediate contempt charges." We walked out of that courtroom into the bright afternoon sun, and it felt like the world had been scrubbed clean. We went back to my house, and for the first time, we didn't lock the doors out of fear. We locked them just to have some privacy. The kids were in the backyard, playing with the bubbles I'd bought them, their laughter floating through the screen door. That night, Emma and I sat on the porch. The $42,000 Derek had stolen was eventually frozen by the court, and Patricia assured us we would get it back. But as I sat there, watching my daughter breathe without a weight on her chest, I realized that the money didn't matter. The house didn't matter. What mattered was the silence, the absence of his voice, the absence of the fear. "Mom," Emma said, looking out at the street, "how did you know? How did you know it would get this bad?" I looked at the small black recorder sitting on the table between us. "I've lived a long time, Emma," I said. "I know that people who need to control everything eventually run out of things to control. And when they do, they start trying to destroy the people they can't own. I wasn't going to let that be you. And I certainly wasn't going to let it be my grandchildren." She took my hand and squeezed it. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner," she whispered. "I'm sorry I let him make me feel like you were the problem." I pulled her close. "You don't ever have to be sorry for surviving," I told her. "You're here now. And that's all that counts." But as the weeks went by, I realized that the war wasn't entirely over. Derek was out on bail, and though he was prohibited from coming near us, he began a new kind of campaign. He started posting on social media, using anonymous accounts to smear Emma's name in the community. He reached out to her employer, claiming she was a drug addict. He was trying to take her job, her reputation, her sanity. One afternoon, Emma came home from work, her face pale. "I was fired, Mom," she said, dropping her bag. "Someone sent a series of emails to the board. They said I was stealing from the office to support my habit. They didn't even investigate. They just said it was too much drama for a nonprofit." I felt that old, cold spark in my gut again. He thought he could still reach us. He thought he could break her spirit by taking her livelihood. I walked over to the laptop and opened the hidden folder on the hard drive, the one I hadn't shown the judge. It was the folder containing the recordings from the very beginning, the ones where Derek bragged to his brother about how he was going to ruin that bitch if she ever tried to leave him. "He thinks he's playing a game," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "But he forgets one thing. I have the receipts, all of them. I didn't call the police this time. I didn't call the lawyer. I sat down and I started writing. I wrote a letter to every board member at Emma's nonprofit. I wrote a letter to the local newspaper, and I attached the audio files. I titled it, "The Anatomy of a Narcissist." By the next morning, the story was the talk of the town. The audio of Derek planning to dismantle Emma's life was playing on the local news. People who had known him for years were calling the house, apologizing for ever believing his lies. His parents, who had always defended him, issued a public statement disowning him. But Derek didn't go away quietly. That night, as the kids were sleeping, I heard a soft scratching at the back door. I stood up, my hand finding the heavy iron skillet on the counter. I didn't call out. I didn't scream. I walked to the door and looked through the glass. It was Derek. He was holding a canister of gasoline and a lighter. His face was twisted into something that didn't even look human anymore. He looked at me through the glass, his eyes wide and vacant. "If I can't have them, no one can," he mouthed. I didn't hesitate. I reached for the alarm button on the wall, the one that went straight to the police station. But before I could hit it, the lighter flickered to life in his hand. The small flame danced in the darkness, reflecting in Derek's hollowed-out eyes. I didn't scream, and I didn't run. I reached for the panic button on the security panel, and the house erupted in a deafening rhythmic wail. Derek flinched, the lighter slipping from his fingers and hissing out on the damp porch. He looked up, the red and blue strobes of a patrol car already rounding the corner 2 blocks away, and the madness in his face turned to pure, pathetic terror. He scrambled off the porch, tripping over the gas can, and vanished into the tree line, just as the gravel crunched under police tires. Officer Daniels was the first through the door, his service weapon drawn. He found me standing in the kitchen, still holding the iron skillet, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure survival. "We have units in the woods, ma'am," he said, his voice urgent. "He won't get far." Within 20 minutes, the radio on his shoulder crackled with a burst of static. "We have him," a voice reported. "Suspect is in custody. Attempted arson." Emma stood at the top of the stairs, clutching Olivia and Noah to her sides, her face a mask of white shock. "Is he gone?" she whispered. "This time," I said, walking toward her. "He's never coming back." The next morning, the local prosecutor didn't offer a plea deal. They saw the gasoline, they saw the lighter, and they heard the recordings where Derek had joked about making me disappear. His bail was revoked. He was moved to a high-security wing of the county jail to await a trial that would now include attempted murder. The community fallout was instantaneous. The news of the family man who tried to burn his children alive was the only thing people talked about at the grocery store and the library. The board of Emma's nonprofit, realizing they had been used as pawns in a madman's game, sent a formal letter of apology and offered her a promotion to director. But the victory felt heavy. Emma sat at my kitchen table, looking at the headline in the morning paper. "He really would have killed us, Mom," she said, her voice hollow. "For control. Just for control." I poured her a cup of coffee. "That's the thing about people who use the law to lie," I told her. "When the lie dies, they have nothing left but the violence." We spent the week changing the locks again, installing reinforced glass, and finally, for the first time in 8 years, Emma took her name back. She filed the paperwork to revert to her maiden name, Castellan. She wasn't a Morrison anymore. She wasn't a shadow. But as the trial date approached, a new shadow appeared. Derek's brother, a man who had stayed silent for months, showed up at my gate. He didn't have a gas can. He had a checkbook. He offered us $100,000 to recollect the recordings as being part of a misunderstanding. He said Derek was sick, not evil. I looked at the check. Then I looked at the bruise on Emma's spirit that was only just beginning to heal. I took the check, tore it into 4 pieces, and handed it back through the bars. "Tell Derek the price of my grandchildren's safety hasn't been printed on a check yet," I said. "We'll see him in court." The trial was a marathon of truth against a dying man's vanity. Richard Steele, Derek's high-priced lawyer, tried every trick in the book. He claimed the gasoline was for a lawnmower, that the lighter was for a cigarette, and that the recordings were a violation of privacy that should never have been heard. But the judge, the same woman who had seen Derek tackled by bailiffs, wasn't interested in fairy tales. She allowed every minute of the 50 hours of audio into evidence. I sat in the witness stand for 6 hours. Steele tried to break me, calling me a bitter, meddling crone who ruined a perfectly good marriage. I looked him dead in the eye. "I didn't ruin a marriage, Mr. Steele," I said, my voice echoing in the silent courtroom. "I exposed a crime. And if loving my grandchildren enough to record the man who wanted to erase them makes me meddling, then I'll wear that title to my grave." The turning point came when Emma took the stand. She didn't look at Derek, who was sitting in a yellow jumpsuit, shackled to the floor. She spoke about the $250,000 he'd hidden, the way he monitored her phone, and the way he'd made her sign her name to the false CPS report while he stood over her with a clenched fist. She played one final recording I didn't even know she had. It was from her own phone, a voice memo she'd started the night he'd found my recorder. "You think you're free?" Derek's voice boomed over the courtroom speakers, distorted but unmistakable. "I own you. I own those kids. I'll see you in the ground before I see you with her." The jury didn't even need 2 hours. They came back with a verdict of guilty on all counts: attempted arson, attempted murder, perjury, and filing a false report. Derek was sentenced to 22 years in state prison. As they led him out, he finally looked at me. There was no rage left, just a cold, empty vacuum where a person should have been. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt peace. We walked out of the courthouse, and the sun felt different, warmer somehow. Emma took a deep breath of the crisp air. "It's over," she said. "It's really over." We went home and had a long sleepover that turned into a permanent move. We sold Emma's old house, the prison with the nice curtains, and used the $42,000 we recovered, plus the proceeds from the sale, to build an addition on my house. A wing just for them. Olivia and Noah started school under their new names, and the unstable grandmother became the woman who taught the neighborhood kids how to bake cookies and tell the truth. 1 year later, the house was full of the smells of cinnamon and wood smoke. Olivia was 9, and Noah was 7, and the eggshells they used to walk on had been crushed under the weight of 1,000 normal, happy days. Emma was dating a man named David, a high school teacher who asked for my permission to take her to dinner, not because he was afraid of me, but because he respected the fortress I'd built. I was sitting on the porch when a letter arrived from the state prison. It was a formal apology, mandated by the court as part of Derek's sentencing. I opened it, expecting more of his manipulation. Instead, it was 3 lines of cold, lawyer-vetted text. It meant nothing. I tucked it into the bottom of the trash can, under the potato peels and the junk mail. I didn't need his words. I had the sound of Noah's laughter from the backyard as he pushed Olivia on the swing. Sometimes people ask me if I feel guilty for the 22 years Derek is spending behind bars. They ask if I regret the secret recordings or the way I dismantled his life. I always give them the same answer. I didn't dismantle his life. I just pulled back the curtain. He was the one holding the gasoline. I was just the one who made sure the world saw the lighter. Emma came out and sat next to me, leaning her head on my shoulder. She looked younger than she had at 30. The gray was gone from her eyes. "We did it, Mom," she whispered. "We're safe." I squeezed her hand, feeling the strength in her fingers. "We did more than that, Emma. We gave them a future where love doesn't come with a price tag of control." 3 years have passed since the morning the CPS officer knocked on my door. I still keep the little black recorder on my nightstand. Not because I'm afraid anymore, but because it's a reminder that the truth is a weapon you have to be brave enough to carry. Derek tried to use the law to silence me, but the law ended up being the megaphone that told my story to the world. Olivia is 10 now, and she wants to be a lawyer. She says she wants to help people who have lost their voices. Noah is 8, and he's the happiest kid in his class. They don't remember the gas can, and they don't remember the shouting. They remember the cookies, the stories, and the grandmother who never gave up on them. I look at the family photos on my mantle, the ones the CPS officer once scanned for cracks. They're still there, but there are new ones now. Photos of Emma's wedding to David, photos of the kids at the beach, and one photo of me, smiling, standing in front of my house. I'm not just Dorothy Castelline, the 68-year-old grandmother anymore. I'm the woman who held the line. The world is full of Dereks, men and women who think they can lie their way into power. They think the quiet people, the old people, the suffocating grandmothers are easy targets. But they forget that we have the receipts. We have the memories. And when the officer arrives at your door with a clipboard in hand, you don't have to panic. You just have to say, "Please come in. I think you need to see something." The truth always comes out. You just have to make sure you're ready to show it. And as I watch the sun set over my quiet, safe home, I know that I was ready. I showed them the truth, and the truth set us all free. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.